Thank you very much, John, and welcome to those of you who weren't at the earlier sessions. Welcome to you and welcome to everyone else who's returned. We have got three fantastic speakers for you for the last session of the day. The format will be that each of our speakers will give approximately a 15-minute talk and then return to their seat. And then when they're all finished, I'll invite them to take the floor and the seats on the floor here. And that will be your opportunity as the in-person audience here, and also to those of you in the stream world who are listening online, to also ask questions, which will be relayed to me via Emma and John. So please feel free, whether you're in person or online, to ask questions of our three fantastic speakers today. The most important thing is that you should hear as little as possible from me today. So I'm going to do very brief introductions of each speaker. But the first today is Professor Frank Ruda. Welcome, Frank. Frank is the Chair of Modern and Contemporary Philosophy here in our School of Humanities, Social Sciences and Law. And Frank is an expert academic, having published a number of books in the area of philosophy, the most recent one with collaborators entitled Reading Hegel. Frank's talk today is going to be concerned with stuckness, which is described in his bio here as the inability, or one description is the inability of market-driven societies to change the ways in which they transform themselves and their environment. I'm sure you'll be delighted to welcome Frank on his talk on stuckness, historical standstill, and modes of production of suspended time. Welcome, Frank.
Thank you, Blair, and thank you everyone for being here. I want to briefly speak today about a research project which I started just a while ago and which will, within the next year or two, manifest as what I fear will be a rather longish book. The shorthand for this project is that it deals with what I refer to as stuckness. What does this mean? The project and my research here seeks to examine our conception, our concept of history and historical change. The methodological idea is to do this not directly by stating or postulating that this or that is history or historical, and by starting from definitions, but I rather think one should start the other way around. That is to say, from a peculiar phenomenon and experience, we might say, namely that of stuckness. So what is stuckness? If you went on the internet and searched Amazon for books on stuckness, you will find a lot of books whose titles are usually something like, and these are all real titles, I quote, Clarity Beyond Stuckness, How to Get and Stay Unstuck, Eliminate Stuckness and Elevate Your Uniqueness, The Sticky Book of Stuckness, What is Holding You Back, or From Stuckness to Growth, Executive Coaching, Unlock Your Leadership Potential. So, stuckness is something that holds you back, that stands in the way of embracing and elevating your uniqueness and produces unclarity. Getting unstuck, growth, uniqueness is clearly preferable. At least this is what the self-help and coaching literature indicates. Stuckness means to be bogged down, caught always in the same loop, not being creative, not being oneself, cut off from one's potential, always the same routines, always the same rhythms, etc. So stuckness seems to be the name for an inability to change, for an incapacity, an incapacitation to transform things in a productive way. Now, what here seems to be an issue on a solely individual level, at least for the self-help literature, attained a kind of global visibility, as we all know, during and because of the most recent pandemic. It put to the halt the planetary dynamics from the movement of people to that of goods, and seemed to have confronted all of us and most of the people on the planet with an imposed form of stuckness that produced massive frustrations and problems of a new kind. Having been stuck at home meant the loss of jobs for many, brought to the fore problems in all forms of social organization, from child-caring issues to domestic violence, etc. Now, it may surprise you, or maybe not, that the pandemic is just the most recent collective experience of stuckness, and by no means one that is absolutely extraordinary. This might be the reason why the virus was called SARS-CoV-2 in the first place, which already indicates a certain form of repetition. It was not as extraordinary as we may have all experienced, and I certainly did experience it as quite extraordinary, I must admit, at least if one believes accounts of global forms of stuckness that one can find in texts that have been written about 100 and more years ago. The critical theorist Walter Benjamin, for example, in 1933, not 100 years, but almost, published a text called Experience and Poverty. In it, Benjamin does not address the phenomenon of poverty and what its experience implies. Rather, his main aim is a poverty pertaining to the and to our very structure of experience. And I want to suggest he thereby articulates something of a theory of collective stuckness, or what he calls a poverty of human experience in general. What does this mean? Benjamin begins with an observation about the relationship between generations that I'm tempted to reformulate it in the following way. An experience is then really an experience when it changes us, changes something profoundly about our outlook in and on life, for example. When it transforms us, educates us, for example, or offers a new perspective, a new insight, or comes with the emergence of a conviction. Now, Benjamin observes the following. Young people believe that there are such experiences. They are on the lookout for experience. But the older generation is tired of experience, wants to, as he writes, liberate themselves from experience. And one thing that follows from it is that they state they have experienced it all, everything. All the ideals, all the hopes, all the love, all of it. And nothing ever changed anything really. It was all an illusion, Benjamin writes, as if citing the mind of a member of the depicted older generation. What he thereby describes is interesting. It is a way of invalidating all experiences in advance. It will ultimately all have meant nothing or all the same, always already. It is a disillusioned account of experience, a sober one that basically assumes that whatever we think is an experience of change will ultimately prove not to have been one in the long run. Benjamin's argument is thus, there is no longer any true experience in such a view. Everything always amounts to the same. We have ideals, we learn they are ideals and thus not really adaptable in and by the world we live in. The illusion is thus that there is something else than stuckness, that we could get unstuck, but we're stuck in an endless generational repetition of ideals that will be disappointed, so we should listen to the sober and older ones and not hang our hopes too high. It is what it is similar to the modification of a famous saying by Jules Claretie, namely, if you're not a socialist, by the time you're 20, you have no heart. But if you're not a conservative, by the time you're 40, you have no brain. In this sense, we have always reached what one of my philosophical heroes, namely Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, once called the end of history. This formulation of the end of history was afterwards taken up by the Japanese philosopher Francis Fukuyama, who gave it a specific twist, which resonates with Benjamin's diagnosis that after all the experiences of the 20th century, it is clear that the best of all worlds is a political form that offers us participatory choices, hence parliamentary democracy, and allows for individual strivings of happiness, hence liberal market economy. We have tried other things. That was our youth, so to speak. We learned they do not work. Let's not try again any other things anymore. It will always end up the same way anyhow. This means even if the present system is not great, so we do not even have to say it's great, it is the only one that works, so we have to get used to being stuck with it. Benjamin's account of this established poverty or impoverization of, and one could even say animosity toward, collective and individual experience had been prefigured by an analysis of modern society that one can find in one of his central references, namely in the work of Karl Marx. Marx's account of stuckness, I believe, is linked to the very ways in which he describes the implementation of bourgeois society, or in short, what he refers to as the capitalist mode of production. That's the technical term. This type of modern society came into being as a result of the French bourgeois revolution, which debunked previously existing monarchy and feudal structures and brought the bourgeoisie to power under the banner of liberty, equality, and solidarity. You may all know this, but surprisingly, only realized what Marx calls an incomplete revolution. Why incomplete? Because the French Revolution certainly changed who was in power, but not the structure of power as such. It replaced the monarch with a group of people, and they are often not even heads of states, even though quite influential. But it did not change the general operation or operating system of power at all. Modern society thereby historically comes into being and is endowed with a peculiar structural feature. It's constituted on a mode of revolutionary change, even on a constant form of self-transformation. But at the same time, this change does leave certain things untouched. The symptom of this, and presumably this is still visible today, if one believes Marxist, is against all better declarations, the persistence of inequalities, global and local, between peoples, nations, but also between men and women. Just think of the gender pay gap, forms of freedom and liberty that are less free than they sound. Just think about how much we're surveilled when we just supposedly freely Google stuff. The crucial point here for the issue of stuckness is that modern societies establish and rely on a practice, according to Marx, he might be wrong, but right, according to Marx, on a practice of constant transformation and innovation all the time. Technological change, new products, new markets, new gadgets, self-driving cars, new iPhones, etc. But this type of change is unable to change the way in which it transforms things. So it's a form of change which never changes the way it changes things. It is a form of transformation of society which constantly transforms society so that society never fundamentally changes. It constantly revolutionizes everything so that nothing ever really transforms. Here, in Marx's account, change becomes a sort of defense mechanism against change. We can transform everything in society as long as the GDP does not drop, and general capital growth is, for example, not something that could ever be discussed. For Marx, this brings us to two further complications. The first one is that the present society presents itself as the only viable possible outcome of historical development. In this sense, it naturalizes, he says, itself, presents itself as the most apt for human nature. Thereby, again, Marx, it eternalizes itself, makes it appear as if the future will always be capitalist, will always be the same kind of society. It presents itself as if it could go on forever. In this sense, from this perspective, we have always already been, at least latently, stuck with modern capitalism. It just took quite some time to get into it, and we will certainly never get out of it again. So what we're stuck with here is the mode of change that we seem to be unable to change. This is Marx's, I think I'm boiling it down a lot, but Marx's point. We are stuck in a movement, as it were, and in this sense, we could say we are weirdly already living in our own future, because our future is just a repetition of what we're living through every day. It will just be the same. It's like science fiction, but in real. But maybe this is just the best one could say. Maybe it's just the best one, and so that's the point. Here I want to make my last point in reference to a thinker from contemporary philosophy, namely in reference to the French theorist of catastrophes, Jean-Pierre Dupuy. Dupuy has formulated an interesting problematization of the belief that the future is nothing but the extension, the continuation of the present, and in some sense of the past. And he argues that this is a temptation that often economists fall for. They calculate future incomes and future factors on the basis that nothing fundamentally changes vis-a-vis or in comparison between past and future. If we start to deal with problems in such a way that we assume the future is just what comes next, and we calculate with it in a stable way, so nothing fundamentally changes, we may produce the very problem that we're trying to prevent. This is Dupuy's claim. What does he mean by this? Dupuy has made a case that if we, for example, start dealing with the ecological crisis in such a way that we think everything will remain stable until a certain tipping point is reached, and so our collective strategy should only be to try to avoid reaching it, this very understanding of the problem might bring about the very catastrophe that we seek to prevent. So our understanding of the problem, that things remain stable all the time, is part of the problem. Let me tell you a brief joke to elucidate this, and this is almost how I will end. Let's say I go to the city after this, to shop, and surprisingly enough, when I enter the M&S, I see from afar what I can only identify, it's quite a shock though, death. He or she, if you prefer, looks at me and I get scared. I run home and tell my partner that I have to leave Dundee because I met death, and she looked at me in a slightly irritated way, so I booked a train to London. When later my partner goes into town, she also runs into death. She's less scared than I am, or I was, and engages her in a conversation, and death says, "Huh, I was surprised to see your partner earlier. I'm scheduled to meet him tomorrow in London." The point I'm trying to make is that sometimes the ways in which we try to prevent things are precisely the ways in which we bring about what we seek to prevent. It seems to me, with regard to dealing with persistent problems that necessitate collective solutions, and because the problem sometimes is precisely in the way in which we frame and perceive the problem, it will be instructive, to say the least, to rethink the category of history and historical development under the conditions of such contemporary historical standstill. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank, for a very thought-provoking talk. And I think I'll encourage the audience to think about how we unstick that stuckness as part of the question and answer session later on, for sure. Thank you, Frank. So now we move on to a student speaker today, and this is Dana Leslie. Dana is a fine art graduate from this university from last summer. What I would like to tell you about Dana is that she was the overall winner in the visual arts category of the Global Undergraduate Awards. Okay, the Global Undergraduate Awards, they are a not-for-profit organization whereby students can submit their work for consideration, and to win this in a global stage is truly a remarkable achievement. So Dana is going to talk to us about her work, which she's done, which is an immersive set of artworks encouraging interaction with the sharing, documenting, and battling of gendered experiences through a compassionate lens. And she's going to talk about that to us today in a talk entitled "Hope is a Form of Planning." Dana, well done and welcome.
Firstly, I just want to give a trigger warning and say that my talk does reference some sensitive themes, including gender-based violence. There are no graphic images or anything, but if anyone would like to step away for 10 minutes or so whilst I speak, please do. Or if you don't want to leave, please feel free to put your earphones in now. Just give you a second. Hi, I'm Dana. I'm an artist, researcher, and visual thinker, originally from Dundee, and I recently graduated from the University of Dundee with a degree in fine art, and I'm currently pursuing my postgraduate studies here as well. I'll be presenting my honours project, which won the Duncan of Georgetown College of Art and Design Research Prize for Contemporary Art and the Global Undergraduate Award in the Visual Arts category in 2022. My degree show work is titled Hope is a Form of Planning and is a series of immersive works encouraging interaction with the sharing, documenting, and battling of gendered experiences through a compassionate lens. For my dissertation in my final year, I was researching gender inequality in society and the arts and how artists subvert and critique this in their work. Around this time, there was also the 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence campaign, which had a massive turnout in Dundee in 2021. And I started to consider how I can combine these two areas of research and activism in my own art practice. The UN declares that gender-based violence, or GBV, is the most widespread, devastating, and persistent human rights violation in our world today. With UNICEF stating that gender-based violence includes physical, sexual, mental, or economic harm inflicted on a person because of socially ascribed power imbalances between males and females. This also includes the threat of violence, coercion, and deprivation of liberty, whether in public or private. The more people I spoke to at these 16 Days of Activism events, and even my own peers, the more I began to realise that everybody had a story, or two, or even five, that they were open to talking about with each other, but they wouldn't want to publicly share the information and state what or where something took place, out of fear of consequence, disbelief, or blame if their name was attached to it. I started to think that if we as a society could blatantly see all of our individual experiences of GBV, it would no longer be possible to turn a blind eye, and then collective change could take place. I identified 3 key elements for this change to occur: awareness, empathy, and challenging the existing systemic structures in our society. So how do we start to make change? How do we tackle these areas? We've seen in recent years a willingness to come forward with the Me Too and Time's Up movements, giving people a voice and raising awareness. However, through the use of social media, those sharing their experiences often had to have some kind of profile or name attached to them. Instead, I launched a new website that allowed people to submit anonymously experiences where they've had some form of gender-based violence happen to them, giving them the power to be in control of how much or how little they chose to share. Users were invited to log the vague location of their experience, such as an area of a town, a city name, an institution, or even a street name if safe to do so, with or without context. A vast number of different locations were logged. Sorry. Also on the website, there was an about page, a privacy policy, a support section, and a what is GBV section, as I really want it to be a safe, transparent, and informative place for people to share their experiences. UNICEF states that gender-based violence is the most pervasive yet least visible human rights violation in our world, despite WHO reporting that 1 in 3 women will experience violence in their life. And so to make the invisible seen, once the anonymous submissions were screened, they were added to the map. A vast number of different locations were logged, showcasing that incidents of GBV do not solely occur down dark alleyways and in nightclubs at 2 a.m, as the media often likes to portray and fixate on. Don't get me wrong, unfortunately they are taking place in these environments. However, they're also alarmingly taking place all around us. Incidents such as misogynistic microaggressions, harassment, discrimination, and worse were reported in our medical sector, in our GP offices and hospitals. They were reported in our employers, from the first interviews right up to the most senior positions. Locations were logged from all levels of education, including primary schools, high schools, universities, and even places we cannot avoid, such as supermarkets, residential areas, and even busy main roads on sunny mornings. GBV has seeped into every faction of our society. Originally conceived just for the Tayside and Angus region, the website garnered over 130 submissions from 8 countries, showcasing that these aren't isolated experiences from a few specific areas, but rather a much larger global issue that must be confronted. So what can I as an artist do with these experiences that people had so bravely shared? Researcher Dr. Brené Brown defines stories as being data with a soul, and in my work, I often create visual databases. After the experiences were submitted, I photographed all the log locations I could, traveling between cities around the country and asking a few people I know further afield to help document these everyday places the incidents had occurred. Next, I developed a 2-part handprinting process and printed every photograph of each location onto a piece of silk. Through the printing process, the ink runs and washes away, with the image appearing faint and cracked, with some locations not even recognizable anymore. This was to convey the fragility of our memories and the doubt we are programmed to implant in our minds when recalling sexist incidents. The prints were then strung around a metal structure as a tangible record, encapsulating the collective issue as a walk-in installation. The work deliberately has quite a delicate quality to it, in the hopes to create a safe environment for discussion and reflection to take place. And the DJCAD degree show, and later the V&A Dundee, were the perfect platforms to showcase this work, as they're both massive parts of the community and receive many visitors. When exhibited, visitors are welcome to walk inside the structure in order to contemplate and confront the sheer amount of places that these incidents had occurred and the familiarity of each of these locations. When moved next to, the silk wafts and flows, giving a pulse-like, alive feeling to the sculpture, a living archive. Considering how we can nurture empathy through art, Our Table is a 10-minute video installation featuring 4 women who each relay their own lived experiences through non-verbal communication. The women were all people who approached me regarding the website. Although originally filmed with sound, I have deliberately redacted the dialogue. Now hands only convey emotion. Body language acts as a loud tool for storytelling, with one woman banging her fists on the table. Another woman walking us through her experience and instinctively scrunching her hands as though holding a set of keys. When this piece is exhibited, visitors are welcome to sit around the table, and the projected hands morph into extensions of their own. Members of the public literally put themselves in the interviewee's shoes, encouraging active looking and empathy. The third and final piece in the series asks viewers to consider who holds the power to shape and change our identities. With the help of technicians Ali Napier and Alan Gregg from Duncan & Johnston College of Art and Design, I learned the basics of coding and woodworking and hand-built a claw machine. In my mind, those in place of authority are puppet masters and hold the power to shape identities and change lives for worse or for better. Viewers are invited to play and win a mask, the passive viewer becoming an active participant, motivated by the prospect of gaining something for free. The machines should be fun. They are usually made for kids. However, in this context, it creates connotations of naivety and ignorance, calling for a better, more informed society beyond inequality and patriarchal power. So I'll leave you to think about this. What small or big acts can each of us do to create change? Can you help raise awareness, show empathy, and/or challenge the existing unequal structures you undoubtedly come across in your daily lives? Because as Gloria Steinem said herself, hope is a form of planning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dana, for that fantastic talk. And we'll get questions later. But I think the most important thing is we recognise the award that you've won, and perhaps if the audience, a global award is a truly remarkable achievement. Finally, but last but not least, I'm really pleased to welcome another new professor of the university, Professor Susie Schofield, who has Chair of Medical Education here. Susie came to the university as a student in, I think, 2001, intending only to study for a year, then return to her professional work in computing, but ended up staying, undertaking a research assistant's position, gaining a PhD. And through all of her work here, really gaining an international reputation in medical education. Really, she has a huge expertise in distance learning, which she specialises in, and in equality, diversity, and inclusion within the university. Susie is now Deputy Director of the Centre for Medical Education, and this year, or in the last academic year, became the school's Associate Dean for Quality and Academic Standards. And I have the great pleasure to work very closely with Susie on a day-to-day basis. Susie is a fantastic colleague, very cheerful, very humorous, and a supporter of Luton Town Football Club. The last we won't hold against her, but Susie is going to talk about her work, and she's giving us a talk today entitled Professional Identity, the Clues in the Pronouns. Thank you, Susie.
Thank you very much. And thank you. I can see some faces of people who have helped me along my academic journey. We've had a fantastic journey today. I mean, the talks that we've experienced, from the very large, the tsunami, down to the very small, the atomic tweezers, was it? With sonic screwdriver, just brilliant talks. But the thing that really came through, and hopefully will come through my talk as well, is the enormous enthusiasm that is within this university, enormous enthusiasm and belief in our social purpose and how we transform lives locally and internationally. We're very proud to educate a lot of professionals in our institution, not least my own school, the medical school. And I'm through this talk going to share my own passion for medical education and the work I do. And I'm going to do that via pronouns, which may seem a bit strange, but this is a form of communication. We've had a lot again today about communication, about body language, about how, was it mitochondria? Or no, ubiquitin, how that communicates. Pronoun, we can learn a lot, I think, from people's use of pronouns. Pronoun, a word that is used instead of a noun or a noun phrase. More specifically, I'm going to talk about personal pronouns. I, you, we, him, her. And I've added here the neo pronouns, or 3 examples of. And I'm going to use some QR codes. There are 3 QR codes, so if anyone wants to get their phone out to scan, feel free. Now, I'm just going to tell you a little Christmas story. I went to the Speedwell, better known as Menis by the locals, last week, and one of my friends said, oh, how did you do over Christmas? And I replied, we did well, 9 points. Now, you've slightly spoilt this one, but don't worry. I'm going to highlight the pronouns, but yeah, as you've already gathered from Blair, this is a huge part of my identity. I am a supporter, for better for worse, quite often worse, of Luton Town Football Club. Amazingly, we won all 3 matches over Christmas and got 9 points. But why on earth did I use we? Why did I say we got 9 points? I've never played football in my life, but that shows my identity to Luton Town Football Club. And my intention to others is to share that enthusiasm. I'm not surprised when other people don't share it, but there we go. But the enthusiasm for football. And so my friends have said, how did you do over Christmas? Coming back to my professional identity, medical education. Let's start with a definition. This is from Tim Swanwick. Medical education's ultimate aim is to supply society with a knowledgeable, skilled and up-to-date cadre of professionals who put patient care above self-interest and undertake to maintain and develop their expertise over the course of a lifelong career. They're in for the long haul. When we talk about professionals, we're talking about doctors, nurses, dentists, veterinary surgeons, allied health professions. So what are the roles of an educator? This is something from Ronald Harden and Joy Crosby from the year 2000. Ronald Harden was Director of the Centre for Medical Education, is now a highly respected all over the world professor and emeritus professor here still, excuse me, at Dundee University. These are the roles they came up with. I still have my cough. Excuse me. You can see facilitator, role model, information provider, resource developer, planner, assessor. I would add to that other roles: researcher, public engagement, leadership. Why is it so important? Well, Good Enough report in 1944 says that properly planned and carefully conducted medical education is the foundation of a comprehensive health service. McLean et al. In 2008 said that good faculty development leads to better professional teachers, educators, researchers, administrators, which leads to improved student learning, which leads to competent, caring practitioners, which ultimately leads to improved patient and community outcomes. How important is that to society? Absolutely part of our social purpose. 5 years of training for an MBCHB in 2016, quite difficult to find figures on this, by the British Medical Association, was estimated at about £220,000 per student. Beyond that, there is postgraduate training, there is continual professional development. Remember, lifelong learners. That's all got to be balanced with the service, that provision of health care. Decere comes from the Latin to teach, and yet the GMC, the General Medical Council, amongst others, recognise that teaching is not innate, the skill, something we develop along the way, but can be improved. All those different roles can be improved by informal and formal education. My own course has about 1,000 students at the moment all over the world. The certificate, the diploma and the masters in medical education. And we've graduated over 5,000 students through distance learning, and that allows our students to contribute work with study. Let's pause and have a look at the pronouns. My own course, did you notice? Our students. Now, I didn't just write this specifically for this talk. I do think of it as my own course. What does that say about me and my relationship to the course? ownership, leadership. Our students, I'm bringing them along with me. We are all part of the big family of medical education. What about our students? Do they have a sense of belonging to the course, to the centre, to the university? I meet an awful lot of our students online and physically at conferences all over the world. And I truly do believe from our alumni that they do have that sense of belonging. What is belongingness, though? Goodenow, not good enough this time, 1993, said it's being accepted, valued, included. This is talking about in the academic classroom, of feeling oneself to be an important part of life and activity of the class. More than simple perceived liking of or warmth, it also involves support and respect for personal autonomy and for the student as an individual. But why is it important? I was very fortunate to be awarded some money by the QAA, the Quality Assurance Agency, UK's body for quality assurance in higher education, to co-lead a project with colleagues from Queen Margaret University, the Scottish Open University, the University of Highlands and Islands, and Edinburgh Napier. And that was back in 2018. We developed a toolkit. And part of developing that toolkit, we wanted to know that there was a point to sense of belonging. And from the literature, we could identify that there was evidence of increased feelings of belongingness, increasing that identity formation, key to professionals, engagement, so with my own students, maximising learning, for example, in placements, academic success, oh dear, student retention, mental well-being. Here's a QR code. I'll let you scan it if you so wish. This is about developing a sense of belonging in online distance learning. Now, we released this the latter half of 2019, little knowing that 2020 we'd all be online. So this was very much about supporting staff developing and running sense of belonging online, programs online that encourage sense of belonging. This I've adapted from Rees, 1983, Distance from Self, about the pronouns. So I'm coming back to pronouns, how we might measure sense of belonging. We might use an inventory where we ask the students to fill in an inventory, think about how much they belong. Or we might use level of participation. We might look at their failure rate. I'd suggest it's a bit late then. Also, what about listening out for those pronouns? Can we tell when they move from talking about they, it, to us, we, our? So can we also look at how that might encourage when we can see moving into professional identity? Here's a definition from Cruz et al. Professional identity, a representation of self achieved in stages over time, during which the characteristics, values and norms of, in this case, the medical profession are internalised, resulting in an individual thinking, acting and feeling like a physician. So I think we probably can tell something from the pronouns that people are using. I'd like to thank all my students for agreeing so readily for me to include their quotes. I've only really got time for a couple of students' work. These are PhD students. Gazio Fire, a female surgeon from Ireland, was looking at the experiences of female surgeons and their colleagues and their patients. But I'm actually here looking at competition created by the organisational structure rather than the individuals. These are two male training surgeons, and one of them's talking about, it's very, very competitive to be a surgeon. One of them's talking about, I think it's the systems that they've created. The second is saying, I think we've created. So I thought that was interesting, two different people at the same stage of their training. And very often in the university, I will hear people talking about the university, the policies. They say we have to do this. And I thought it was very interesting, the human rights talk earlier, talking about, you know, is it Europe that's telling us to do all these things? What can we do? What can we do to bring about this change? And your own talk. So I think as I say, very interesting listening to those pronouns. The second one I'm going to give example of is Aaron Verma, who another PhD student who's now doing fantastic work with decolonising the curriculum. His project was looking at medical and nursing students in gendered environments. And this is a gay male nursing student. And he's saying, we as professionals are going to have an awful lot of catching up and an awful lot of work to do to remain politically correct. He'd just been to a talk where he'd been told there were 52 sexual and gender identities. And he's thinking, goodness, I'm part of the community and I'm not sure I can learn them all. He's already identifying himself as one of those professionals, as a student, and he's talking about we. But then the next quote, I feel this is beneficial that there are members of the nursing community who do belong to the LGBT community, as they can share, the wealth of their experience. But he has already identified that he is part of that community. So I was fascinated by why he goes from we to they. Perhaps he doesn't feel ready to come out at work. Unfortunately, there is still homophobic bullying in the professions, in society as a whole. Or perhaps he feels at this point he's not ready to share his experiences, or they won't be valued. I think by sensitising ourselves to when we're doing these qualitative interviews, we could then ask a bit further and find out which of those reasons might be the case, because we can speculate, but we might go totally in the wrong direction. My third example is talking about writing in academia. We're encouraged to use the third person for all academic writing. This is because it gives your work a picture of objectivity rather than personal thoughts. Well, I can tell you with qualitative writing, that can get extremely clumsy and artificial. And some of my colleagues who are in qualitative work are nodding their heads. And there is a move to I for PhD students, but we for research papers. But I've had numerous PhD students who use we rather than I when they're writing their thesis. And again, I'm thinking, is that because you feel it sounds a bit cheeky, a bit bold? And then I have to go and say to them, please change all the we's to I, and then we go to papers, change all the I's to we's. So just a strange rule we have in academic writing. Yeah, I've noticed, I've been looking at all the talks, and here we've all talked about we, about our research. If you still not convinced about the power of the pronoun, let's follow the money. Let's go to advertising. So this is from Secrets to Using Pronouns in Copywriting. It's essential you write copy that speaks to your target audience and not at them. So 80% using you, who are going to buy my product, and 20% about the product. Which one would make you feel more inclined to buy this car? Through our first-rate sales department, or you can drive your new car tomorrow. Does that make you imagine driving your new car? Because I'm an educationist, we'll have a quick quiz, bit of student participation. Which product was because you're worth it? L'Oreal, yes. Interestingly, they've now changed it because we're worth it. So remember back to Reese, that's brought it even closer in. What gives you wings? Red Bull. Someone did take a court case out in America, so you could have actually got your money back for your Red Bull in America for a couple of years. It is, are you? The Independent. And you either love it or hate it. Marmite. Now this one might backfire a bit, we're all in it together. We did use it in COVID. Linda Martindale mentioned it this morning to get that feeling of, yes, we're all in it together. Backfired rather, didn't it, with the government about COVID. No, we're not all in it together. If we are, some of us are on luxury liners and some of us on sinking rafts. So to end this talk, my challenge to you is to start to listen out for those pronouns. What do they convey about your professional life, about advertising, about politics, and if you're so minded, about football. And if you'd like to know anything else about the course, I've put a couple of more QR codes up. The left-hand one is for free resources, and the right one is a call to action about finding out more information. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Susie. And if I can invite our three speakers to take their seats on the floor. The way this works, for those of you who haven't been here earlier in the day, is if you've got a question, please put your hand up, and either Shabnam or Rachel will bring the microphone to you. You need to speak into the microphone so that the people in the online audience can hear you. So Anna is right on it. So let Anna ask the first question.
Thank you. Thank you for some very interesting presentations. I was struck by stuckness. And in particular, I wanted to ask you, just to try and put a positive spin on this, do you think there is a connection, perhaps possibly to be established between stuckness and boredom? And meaning by that, particularly the fact that boredom can be potentially a great source of creativity. And so we can get unstuck just by being a little bit bored.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a great question. There's one of the most prominent philosophers of the 20th century, Martin Heidegger, basically indicated that boredom is a proper experience of time because, like, he was German. In German, it's Langeweile, so it's an experience of longness of the stretch of time, and thereby we learn something about time. I think there's an interesting twist to it. There's a Italian philosopher called Paolo Virno who has written a book called Déjà Vu. And the book on déjà vu basically says, makes the claim or tries to argue that we're bogged down by possibilities. There's so many possibilities. And that already has, that kind of problem description already appeared in existentialism in some sense, but there's so many possibilities that we don't know what to do and we feel incapacitated. So sometimes, and there is, I think, an interesting twist or dialectics or oscillation, sometimes having more possibilities, right, means effectively having less possibilities. And it makes acting more complicated. But thank you, yes.
Other questions? We've got one up here. I'll let you take the microphone up, but I'm going to ask one from the online audience for Dana first. It's from someone anonymous. But the question is, have you had any particularly memorable or meaningful conversations around your artwork, particularly where you've exhibited it, that resonated with you, and are you happy to share those?
Yeah, I've had so many actually. The 3 pieces were part of my degree show, which was last summer. And so a lot of visitors came up to me then, and people were so honest and just willing to talk and share their experiences. There's been a couple in particular. There was actually one student on my course who came up to me and said that her artwork also kind of was about giving people voices, but in a different way. And she, and it'll stick with me, she said, I'm the voice for these people, but you're the voice for me. You're making work that I couldn't make. And I just thought that was incredible. And I also, on the back of the work, there's a podcast series by Hugh James, who are a lawyer company who defend people who have had experiences like this. And so they've made a podcast series giving out accessible free information and other work people are doing to try and raise awareness and help people in their situation. And so they asked me to speak on their podcast. And from that, I've had a few people just getting in touch again, sometimes anonymously through emails, just kind of saying like, thank you for this, and like pointing us in the direction and stuff. So yeah, there's been a lot of really good.
Fantastic. It's great for your work to have impact like that. So
yeah.
Well done. Fantastic. So we had a question here. Microphone's now there. Thank you.
A question for Frank. You did touch on catastrophe, but I wondered if you could say a bit more about how you'd see the relationship between stuckness as a sort of cultural dominance and the apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic visions and expectations, which seem like a kind of radical coming unstuck superficially.
Yeah. Yes. Thanks so much, Andrew. I think so. The strange phenomenon, I think, that one has to integrate in contemporary experiences of collective stuckness is that we seem to be stuck with a certain vision of catastrophe. Right, stuck with a certain vision of problems, stuck with a certain vision of the ecological crisis. And the way in which we envision it, right, and the way in which we envision the ways in which we can deal with it, that was the point I was trying to make, seems to be problematic because there's so many assumptions within it, namely that we can manage it, that just like, I don't know, toning down what we do will be sufficient. And all that relies on a certain assumption of that the future will ultimately just be structurally the repetition of the present somehow. So it is a future that in advance becomes calculable, right? Economizable. And if that is the case, I think the temptation is very strong to think then we can just economically deal with it. But that is a very optimistic, I mean, like closet optimism that we buy into there. We A, think we are the agents, B, we think all the factors are stable and are all known. And at the same time, if we just stop certain things, this will have the effect. And even the catastrophe seems, right? I mean, I think often, well, not always, but often people think global warming is just things getting hotter all the time, right? But it really isn't. It can lead to a fundamental disintegration. And no one, I mean, and what that effectively means is totally unclear. So even the assumption of the stability of the crisis, right, is somehow part of the way in which I'm trying to say we're stuck with a certain vision of a problem. I hope that is an answer.
Thank you very much. Other questions? I've got one whilst we're waiting for somebody. So again, for Frank. So this was from someone anonymous online, Frank. So it says, how can we recognize or diagnose stuckness on individual, institutional and societal levels? And how can we begin to treat it or begin to become or to become unstuck at each level? And I actually had a similar question. I was thinking, you know, you alluded to Marx and the structure of society, whether it's a capitalist society or not, impacts that. And I guess my question was, is it about changing the structure of society, or is it individuals' responsibility or ability that will produce unstuckness?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's obviously the maximum question and the most tricky one. I think for me, I would try to give at first a modest answer. I would try to at least start to identify what are the forms in which we perpetuate a form of stuckness that make us feel different. Right? Because sometimes we think we're absolutely active and change things, but thereby just perpetuate exactly what we try to overcome. So I think the first just minimal and very modest critical step could be to identify the very things that perpetuate what we think the problem is in ways that we don't identify as part of the problem. That was, I think, what I was thinking.
Thank you very much. Other questions? Rory. No, we need it for the online audience, I'm afraid. Thank you.
So a quick question that perhaps for everybody. The university as an entity has been around for many centuries, hasn't changed that much. So do you think we are stuck to a certain way in how what is the university for and how should it operate? Do you have any thoughts?
Who would like to have a go at that first? What's the university for?
That's a great question. I should
And are we
hand it over
stuck?
to the principal, shouldn't I? About what?
You should know the answer.
I should know the answer, apparently. Dear, oh dear. Universities, I think, are for places to encourage critical thought, open discussion. We do have some challenges with that at the moment. For professional development, yes, but also for critical thinking within that professional development. To me, universities are mostly, we should be that open space, that safe space, again, a word that keeps coming up, for that critical discourse, for learning new ideas. I mean, as we have for this last day and a half, adding on to that, the fact that you're then bringing in accredited courses for students, as well as the research, then starts to become quite a balancing act. But that's what I think universities are for. What do you think, Rory?
Do you have a view?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, already from the very old Greek idea of paideia, I mean, there is a certain unstucking or unstuckness in education, of course, right? I mean, the whole idea of creating a form of social permeability and so forth, right? That is, I mean, of course, that is the ideal. And then the question is, how does one make that impactful and effective? Yes.
Yeah, I kind of echo your sentiments and open for discussion and just equality, a place where anyone is welcome and everyone can be who they want to be. And mostly a university is a safe place for shared knowledge and to be the better version of yourself.
I think it's important that we have that opportunity to have those critical discussions in a safe and supportive environment. And in fact, I've been working with a group of people on developing almost like a statement on freedom of speech and how we can conduct those critical conversations in that way so that people do not feel threatened, or they can be challenged by them, but they do not necessarily feel threatened by them. And we've written that. That's been to UEG for consideration, and we want for next year to help people understand how these conversations should take place. Because, as Susie said, it's a highly volatile environment at the moment, and people can take offence easily. But they do not have a right not to be offended. But on the other hand, we do have to conduct these conversations in a way that is safe and appropriate. And that's been the challenge in writing that documentation, is getting that right. And we've consulted quite widely over that. Susie's even been involved, I think, in looking at that too. So thank you very much. Now I've got some more questions here. Have you anyone else raised a hand in the room? I'm going to ask two more questions from the online audience. So the first one for Susie. Fascinating talk, Susie. This is from Jeanette. Very interesting point on they've versus we've created the systems. Is there any evidence yet as to how this understanding continues into the students' later professional careers? The move from they've into we've.
Yeah, it is interesting because we want to develop people who are thinkers, who are innovators, who are going to try and bring in change, even if we're all stuck. But they're going into sometimes really quite rigid structures as very junior people. So I think part again of our work as a university is to develop how to put together your arguments, evidenced arguments, but also understanding very much about the structures that you're going into and the rationale for why things they are as they are. I think it is very easy, especially when we're feeling threatened or when we're feeling fed up that we don't like a policy, to talk about they. But I think we do need to keep reminding ourselves that, you know, we all have a voice, but there is a way to express that voice, and there is the thinking that we have to do and the finding out and the rationale for decisions about why things are done the way they are. But it's always refreshing to have young new voices in challenging us on the way we've always done things.
Absolutely. And finally, the final online question is for Dana. So this is an anonymous one, which is so often the case, but thank you for the question nevertheless. Dana, thank you for sharing your amazing work. I think your presentation and what you've created is incredibly important. The question is the website active, and how can your work be viewed now?
So currently the website is not active. There was a local charity in Dundee who was quite eager to try and integrate it into their already existing organisation, which I think is still getting worked on, which is quite good because it was just me running it, which was nice that I was completely in control of screening everything, making sure that everything was getting filtered and there was definitely no hate or anything surrounding stuff. But I thought that if there was like a trained group of people, that would be the ideal situation. So currently it's not up, but the work you can still view on the DJCAD degree show is still live from the 2022 year. I also have my own website, which is just danaleslie.co.uk. And then the HJ podcast, Hugh James podcast, I'd recommend as well, not just like for my one, but they do like weekly or monthly podcasts, which are really interesting as well if you're interested in the topic overall.
Thank you for that. And hopefully that will guide people to that work. Any final questions from the audience? No? Well, with that, it just remains for me to thank our 3 speakers from this session, for the 12 speakers, which includes you, from the other sessions today, to thank the audience for listening so carefully and for your excellent questions, both here in the room and to those of you online, and to thank the organisers for their work today, particularly John, but the whole of the team, Emma, Rachel, Shabnam, and anyone else who's been involved in the organisation today. Fantastic job. Thank you very much for attending.